Right.
But like, what I'm trying to get them to understand, in the best way possible, is that there was once racial unity, but it didn't last very long. In the
What period are you thinking of?
1619 to 1662.
1619.
Because here's what's going on. The slavery laws haven't been officially passed yet. And again, I'm not sugarcoating, because I know that European citizens don't have it as bad as Africans, but they still have it bad. And what I'm trying to get them to see, that Virginia was more like Barbados in this sense. Barbados is an interesting story. So you have these poor whites. They're not called white yet. That's the thing. They're not called white yet.
Right.
They're just English.
They didn't
right?
become white till what?
Right.
1775.
There's not really a term yet. They're just Europeans, right? They're poor people. Some of them are German, some of them are Irish, some of them are Scots, some of them are English. But what I started noticing, especially around the 1630s, is how many runaways from plantations were interracial. They would always say this man was Negro, this man was black, but they would also say, and he ran away with a Scot, he ran away with a German, he ran away with a Dutchman. So you're starting to see that during that period where people were in the field together, they're being whipped and beaten together.
Absolutely.
Therefore, there's actual real brotherhood. See, I don't believe in artificial brotherhood. I think that's abstract. But I think there is a real brotherhood when you're in the trenches together. People are shooting at you, people are hitting you, people are beating you. There's your solidarity. We're in this shit together. We got to get out of here.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's going on, and I know why it's going on, because people are complaining about it.
Yeah, I mean, even in the movies, you'll see that. Actually, I don't know if you saw Emancipation.
The 13th had a story about this. Yeah.
But it's kind of like hidden, even within that visual.
Well, it's hidden because nobody wants to talk about it, because they'll tell you, it tells you there's real solidarity. But what starts to happen is you'll start to notice it's not that the white people won't be whipped. They'll be whipped, but they won't be whipped as much.
Right.
Or their sentences won't be as bad. Like, they'll be same punishments, but the sentencing will be harsher for one group. You're starting to see that little bit of separation. But
as well as the ability for them to gain
more freedom.
Right.
But you'll also notice interracial marriage occurs.
I think people need to understand that. That's a good point, because you don't make a law against it unless it was already happening.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, you have this 40-year period where slavery's not legalized, and you've got people kind of integrated. Now remember, the key for this is the African population is very small still, 2%, right? So I've always noticed that white folks are good at integrating until a number reaches a certain percentage, and then it goes away. So always remember, solidarity is also more possible when the numbers are small.
Right.
But that still happens. I always look for what people are complaining about, and there's several references in particular to Germans and Africans being too united. I don't know, maybe as fellow foreigners, different. But the point is, it all starts to crumble in the 1650s. Something remarkable happens in the 1650s. If you look at Oliver Cromwell overthrowing the monarchy and beheading the king, right? The governor of Virginia, who was the king's friend, got fired, Barclay. There's an 10-year period here in Virginia where aristocracy's on the run. People are challenging their masters. There's a rise in white servant rebellions. Gloucester County, Virginia, 8 white men are executed for trying to kill the planters. You see some integrated rebellions too. But you're starting to see that people taking up guns if they're being whipped too much or they're not being given their contracts. People are willing to do that. But we also see a rise in attorneys coming here. They'd say meddling common law lawyers. There are people actually trying to try cases. And so if you've heard of the Elizabeth Key case, she's a black woman who's born in Virginia. Her mother's an enslaved African woman, but her father is an English white planter. There's a paternity case. He actually says, okay, Elizabeth's my daughter, so we'll free her when she's 21, and we'll give her a piece of paper guaranteeing her freedom. When he moves back to England, the next guy takes over her contract, says, I don't have to free her, she's African. He says the word African. She's born here, by the way. Her name is Elizabeth Key.
So would you say that's possibly one of the first
this is where it changes
areas of that one drop rule?
Yeah, because what happens is when she actually wins her case, but she lives as an enslaved person for 6 years. Think of how that's frustration. You're being enslaved for 6 years while holding a piece of paper saying you're not supposed to be, right? But the lawyer takes up her case using English law, because no one's ever bothered to try a case on this. Like, no one thought they could actually use the law to free people. Well, he says, well, the lawyer says, well, according to English common law, your father's status determines your status. If her father's white and English, well, I'm not white. He says, if her father's English, you're English. Number 2, you can't enslave her because she has a contract, and contracts are sacred. Number 3, you can't enslave her because she's Christian, and Europeans already have this law. Christians can't enslave other Christians. See, the Angolans weren't Christian yet, so that's how they're justifying it. Now you got black folks who are becoming Christian. Now that's challenging that system. And they actually free her. They appealed the case of Jamestown. They freed her because no one's passed a slave law yet.
That's a good, interesting one. I don't think I heard that. Keys, I have to look that up. That's
so
interesting.
Here's where we were sitting matters. 1662, right? This is now a brick city. Pierce family's long dead. Governor Barclay comes back. First thing he does is call an election for an assembly.
Comes back from England?
He stayed here. He retired here. But once Oliver Cromwell got killed and the monarchy came back, they put Barclay back as governor. You know, the first thing he did was hold an election. The legislature met right where we were sitting. 1662. I don't know which room of the three it was. A law was passed right here that said, from henceforth, the status of the mother will now determine the status of any child. 5 years later, a law was passed saying baptism.
Well, they had an issue. Now they have precedence.
Now they changed.
And anyone else has a right to appeal before the court.
Any planter has a child with an enslaved woman, that person's now automatically enslaved. You see? That's where that's coming
They
from.
were reversing that precedence.
And what happened, though, when the woman was white and the man was black, they had to figure that out because they couldn't enslave that child because they just changed the rules. So the woman would be punished. She would be punished as disgracing her culture by being whipped in the church in front of all the other women.
Wow.
And the child would have to leave the colony. But if the child had a white father, then they would just enslave.
Now, at this point, what do you think that population balance is between...
I still think by the 1660s, the Africans are still probably like 4 or 5% of the colony. They're still not majority of the workforce. But this is going to change everything because now you have major laws now legalizing slavery. You know what else happens? Charles II introduces the Royal African Company. Now you have the British royal government actually engaging in the slave trade directly versus piracy from the Spanish. And they make their base of operations between Ghana and Nigeria, particularly around the Biafra coast. And so something like 45% of African-American DNA in Virginia is Igbo Yoruba makes sense. One of these three rooms was the headquarters of the Royal African Company's branch here. Wow. They had one in Barbados, Bermuda. And by the way, now the Barbados, Bermuda, and the Bahamas are now, and Jamaica are now running sugar cane. That's making English long as Virginia harsher. They're taking their cues from the Caribbean now.
There are those, including me, that's in the camp that's saying a lot of those, there were some Africans, but a lot of these folks were being trafficked right within this whole area here.
Could also be the case. I don't think we know enough yet.
Right.
But what I'm saying is...
Now, what we do know is we can't find these ships they're talking about.
I'll tell you what we can do, though. Honestly, whether someone's African or someone's from the Caribbean or someone's indigenous...
Well, in essence, like you said, we are all Africans.
No. What I'm saying is, what I'm getting at is the argument people are making. What I'm arguing is whether someone is a black Caribbean or directly from Africa or a black in English, moved to London, or was an indigenous Native American with darker skin. What I am saying after 1662 is none of that matters.
Right.
Everyone's black. If you're not white, you're black. And what starts to happen is they still have to figure out how to break that white solidarity with the black community. Because remember, the white indentured serfs still the majority until I think 1720.
Right.
So they started passing farther laws in the 1690s. Interracial marriage is outlawed in 1691. Africans are denied they just say Negroes, so it could mean people from it. Right. But nobody can own a gun unless you're white. 1680, 81.
But I like to use reductive reasoning. It doesn't make sense to make such laws for 2 to 4% of the people.
Well,
I'm thinking the population is much larger.
They might be also including the Native American, right?
Exactly.
And I also think they're also trying to, and you may see, and I haven't had census records, this may be the post-1660 explosion of the slave trade because of the Royal African Company as well.
Gotcha.
Right. I think it's a combination. But what I'm arguing is they're also passing these laws in the 1690s because Bacon's Rebellion is like the last major integrated army. You've got poor whites and black folks that are actually in Bacon's army to overthrow the government. They lose. And they start to pass laws saying who is white and who is black for the first time. There are some Europeans who have some multiracial ancestry, but they're passing and they're going to keep quiet. That's what the DNA is picking up now.
Exactly.
People who are like 2-3% African. How did that happen? That's what's being picked up.
Yeah, it's being passed on.
It's being passed on from the 1600s. But they actually passed the final laws right at the time Williamsburg takes over. And it's to say the only way to correct, it says the Negro person is through physical force. And in 1701, it becomes illegal to whip a white person. I'm going to argue at that moment, there's your last gasp of solidarity, because what you've done is once you take the whip off poor white backs, somebody's going to have the whip put in their hands. And that's how you get in the American South, that culture.
They had to build that subservient,
Who
the hierarchy.
Who was the overseers?
Exactly.
Ironically, many of the ancestors of the overseers and the slave catchers were themselves the very indentured servants who ran in the fields together with Africans. But I think psychologically, deep down, I'm saying this is a white Southerner, I think that's known.
Well, psychologically, that must have been
I think psychologically now. I've read a lot of Baldwin. I like reading Baldwin for this, but I think the psychosis of the American South, white and black, the duality of white and black, no matter what anyone else is, you're either one or the other, right? You pick whatever they say you are, you are. We know our science tells us something else,
right.
But I'm saying this is how it's done. Once you create a class system and a caste system based just on whiteness and blackness as a binary, and you're either in one camp or the other, and everybody knows who's in what camp, and anybody who crosses that line, that's where you get that violence.
Well, it's a power structure. You have to build a power structure.
But if you look at the American South, and you look at Native American culture, and Scots-Irish culture, and West African culture, particularly Nigerian culture, and you put it all together, and you recognize how integrated our food is, our figures of speech, our musical culture. I mean, American blues has Scottish ancestry. American country has African ancestry. We think it's the opposite way.
Well, that's the thing. People don't understand you can only beat the drum once.
Yeah.
Once it's still the drum.
People are just going to be like culturally very integrated.
Absolutely.
But politically violently separated. It's like, we know integration is going on when the light comes on. Oh, I don't know you. I never saw you. Because I want to keep myself out of trouble.
Right.
But that's created because until that point, the poor white community was notoriously integrated with everyone else. And that's why I think you see that in London already. But once you create a caste system based on color, you give even the poorest, most degraded white higher status over the highest status African.
Well, you just explained the same situation that we're staying in today.
Mm-hmm.
It's just instead of, Barkley or someone else, it's just...
Oh, it's the same thing.
It's intertwined in politics.
It's the same thing because it's sort of like the thing about it is because people don't like hearing that word privilege and power, but I mean, the point is, it's not like I'm going to get in sackcloth and ashes and be able to give it up. Like, you can't. It exists. It's been created for hundreds of years. Is to be aware of it and not be a jerk about it and actually use it for good if you can. But it's just to understand that, like, I grew up in an 80% majority black community, and I can assure you, in a city that had a black mayor and a black mostly police force and a mostly black population, I am the least likely person that's ever going to be pulled over in that situation. I'm going to have even more privilege.
Right.
It's so where I grew up, it was so obvious that literally someone who looks like me can pull out a phone and have someone killed just like that. That's how you do it today. It's been done. It happens. And people have been saying it doesn't happen. Now people are recording it happening. Well, this has been going on for a long time.
Right.
But I think the violence, what I'm trying to get at is I think the violence is rooted in a closeness. In other words, it's a visceral, like when I explain northern segregation, it's about place. Okay, this is a black neighborhood, this is a white neighborhood, and within the white neighborhood, this is Jewish, this is Irish, this is Italian, right?
Right.
And all the neighborhoods look the same, but this is your street, this is our street. South's never been that way. It's never been about place. It's been about, not about space, it's been about place. Like, you and I will be in the same room, but you go through that door, I go through this door. Mm-hmm. Or, we don't care if black people at the laundromat, they just have to be wearing a uniform working for a white person. You see, it's about that social caste. The only other place like us is South Africa. South Africa and the American South is so much alike. So similar.
It's that learned behavior.
Yeah, very similar.
Oh, it's work here, let's take it and implement it here.
The
same folks.
The most vicious whites to the native Africans are the poorest whites, who have the most in common. The Afrikaners have the most in common with the Africans in South Africa as far as language and lifestyle, and they've been there 500 years. But because they're just a little bit better off, they're going to fight like hell to keep that. Right. And it's just like what Martin Luther King said, like, it's the poorest white guys who hit me the hardest because it's all they had. That's only thing they had was this skin privilege, and they will murder to keep it. And it's like, if we understand this, because I talk about brotherhood between white and black Southerners, but I use the phrase, it's a brotherhood like Cain and Abel. Right. That's the book I want to write one day, Cain and Abel, about the killing of the brother.
The dichotomy of that story.
Yeah. And I think what we're missing is, we're talking about 1619, we're talking about today, but we're missing that later period to link the two, to say, the thing we're forgetting is when the Africans and the indentured servants were the majority of the population and saw themselves as the same, there were some real threats to the social order. And I will tell you that in Barbados, we see the results of what would have happened. Where the poor whites, the Irish, integrated within the redlegs, right? You look at the coast of Barbados, you still see those poor whites relatively integrated, right? Not the ones that live on the big, mansions, but the Irish.
There's still that backstory of what this country was to become. This white Christian.
Yeah. And when anything got in that way, it was crushed. It was crushed. And but you had to get poor whites to go along with it, because in England, of course, they're 99% of the population, so you can't really use race as a tool then to divide. But in Virginia, once you get more of the other, there's where the solidarity breaks down, because then it becomes about color solidarity versus class solidarity. We've never had strong class solidarity in the United States, precisely because race is our class. And it was invented precisely to keep that from happening. Exactly. And all the while, how many people really were the planters? How many people really made the money off this? It's a 5%, 10% in Virginia?
Probably less.
But they had to keep the others from saying, well, one day I can be like them. Right. I mean, how do you get all these guys to fight for the Confederate Army who aren't slave owners who were poor? You tell them, if you don't, they'll kill you. If you don't, you can't be like us.
Right.
Meanwhile, they're getting blown up on the battlefield. Where are the planters' kids? They're not in the army. And see, people got to break that cycle. Like, I'm not condemning somebody for being a soldier if they were drafted. I'm saying they got to break that cycle of thinking that white planter on the hill is your brother.
Right.
Because they don't see you as their brother.
Well, we see the same thing today.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We see the same
you
thing
see
today.
someone waving hey, you got to vote for the billionaire, because the billionaire is going to help you in the West Virginia coal mine, but he's not going to help you.
Right.
They'll laugh at you. But thanks for your vote. But don't be with that Hispanic person. Don't be with that black who actually has some of the same problems as you, where you could work together and deal with these drug problems and deal with these schooling problems. But
it's interesting. I always say one love, because that cures all of that. That the whole system is meant that we don't ever have one love. How do you? What's the step where we can do that? Do you think there's ever a place where, there's not that push and pull? If that whole story is not backed by the powers that be, that you have to be separated. Do you think that's the fix, or it has to be individually, where you learn the history, the true history?
I think it's individually, because I've been I wouldn't have told you a lot of this stuff 10 years ago. Although some of it's stuff I kind of thought about growing up where I did, but it's kind of like I've been on a personal journey. I lived in Southside Virginia. I've lived in Mississippi.
To be honest, none of what you told me is new to me.
No.
But it's good to hear it coming from you, because there's a light of honesty.
Yeah. It may be like new to me. Yeah.
Right.
Because I'm not forced to think about it. It. I have to be I want to think about it, but I'm not forced to. I really could live my entire life, honestly, if I wanted to.
Here's the difference, I think. I think the difference is proximity.
Yeah.
And I think you said it, because you've lived in a neighborhood where it was like 60, 80%, melanated people. And in that sense, you've had, you've been close to them. You've been people alike. You don't have to imagine in your mind what these people are like. And
I'll tell you,
imagination is a funny thing.
I'll tell you what happened with me. Yes, you get a real brotherhood when you grow up. You play together. You're one. But I would notice being on teams when we would get on a bus. We would play a baseball team, and there was one or two us white kids, and I kind of remember we would go to the rural places because people knew our city. They could tell. They knew what that name meant. I mean, just people knew. And we would go in these small towns, and I don't experience this on my own. Right. But it's like a record scratch, and everybody's looking. And I remember people grabbing purses. Now remember, this doesn't happen to me when I walk down the street.
Right.
It never does.
Right.
I know intellectually it happens because my friends will tell you, but I don't experience it.
Right.
I know, but I don't know. I get it. I'm not saying anyone's lying. I'm saying I don't experience it. So then all of a sudden, why is everybody looking like we're going to kill them?
Right.
And then, I'm really shocked by this.
You understand because you've experienced it. Well, somebody tells you, what?
Well, my first baseman's like, well, this is us every day, right? So you're getting a little taste, just a little taste, and you don't like it.
Yeah.
See, because all you have to do is, walk right over there, and no one's, oh, what a nice kid.
Yeah, exactly.
But then you get this other thing, why are you hanging out with them? I've had that happen.
Right.
I've had that been said to me.
Right.
But what I'm trying to say is, most white Southerners have had these bonds before because you can't live in this part of the country and not have them because we are so much tied together. But at some point, a lot of us just choose to walk away. I don't have to say anything that happened. I don't have to speak out. I'm just going to forget. That's why I said to Cain Abel, I'm just going to forget that we grew up together. I'm just going to forget that we know one another.
That's the easiest thing to do.
And just sort of melt.
Yeah.
And, you know, honestly, I didn't know how long I was going to do this tour. I was only supposed to do this tour from 2017 to 2019 because we had during the project. And I all this stuff, I started going down these paths of thinking, well, I was learning all this stuff. Some of it I knew, some of it I didn't. I was learning all this stuff, and I said, well, why isn't there a sign about this? Why isn't there a statue of this? And, I mean, I kind of answered my own question. I'm like,
it's not the story you wanted to tell.
Well, but I thought I was going to have to dig for it. And the fact is, most of the stuff was easy to find.
Right.
So therefore, it wasn't being emphasized. It wasn't important. And what started to bother me, I started doing these tours, and I started watching people. And I realized that we all get judged by whatever package we're in. Like, I know how I get stereotyped. I'm standing by the obelisk, you know, people, this is like in the summertime, you get a lot of crowds.
Right.
And it's so funny, sometimes you'll get people of color, they'll kind of come up and they'll be like, is this the tour at 2 o'clock? You know, like, are you the guy actually giving it?
Right.
And I get it, because how many people have done a crappy job? Like, yeah, I'm going to be doing the tour, and it's a tour that I wrote, and I really enjoy giving. And like, when you just said, like, I actually wrote this, researched this, people feel a little bit, oh, your park's not making you do it. You know, whereas some read a script.
Well, no, I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing. You got to make people comfortable, but that's the other side of the coin, right?
Yeah.
Well, you almost have to earn everyone's trust in a sense, because they don't know.
But it makes me do a better job.
But it goes back to, again, what Martin Luther King says, and that's the thing that even myself, I have to fight against. I can't judge you. By seeing you, because people do it to me. Right. It's the other reason why I have locks. Because that's the ultimate. I don't give a F. Right. Because it's about what's inside. Right. It's about that. I want you to judge me by knowing me, not looking at me and making a determination. And the same is true for you. They shouldn't make a determination. And we, as folks of color or melanated folks, we have to give other people an opportunity as well. But it's so hard. Because we've been burned so many times.
So what I try to do is I have like usually when I have 5 minutes, I usually there's a few things I can say and do where people go, oh, yeah, you really wrote this.
Right.
And what's funny that I watch, I've been observing the American people for a few years. The folks of color that are kind of like, at first don't like the tour, end up like, oh, I like this.
Right.
But the opposite is true. You'll get some white folks who are like, oh, this won't be so bad. And they don't think that this is a tour I'm going to give. They'll be like, so, this is a tour, right? And I'll be like, yeah. And they don't think it's about Africans. And sometimes I'll say it's about Africans. They'll be like, oh, well, it's 3:30. I haven't eaten lunch yet. Oh, you have, or there's some,
Too much truth.
But I'll watch kind of like the two groups kind of switch places from the back row to the front row. But I'll watch kind of, and you can usually tell when there's more white liberals. There's ways you can tell. But what's funny is, like, and younger people usually aren't the issue here. But there's this sort of like what I would call uncomfortable middle-class white person butt squirm that I start watching happening after about 5 minutes of the tour.
Right.
And when I see it, I'm like, they're not going to be on the second stop.
Right.
But if you're willing to take me to the second stop, I will leave you on this tour unified.
Right.
But some people just can't give you. But here's the thing. I would thought in 5-6 years I'd be getting all these complaint letters. Or like, no one's saying I'm wrong. Or no one's trying to prove me wrong. They just don't want to hear it.
So much truth all at once.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's not even like, oh, we don't think you're right.
Right.
We know you're probably right. You look like the stereotypical history guy.
Right.
We know you're probably like, they don't think I'm wrong.
Well, I think if I had anything to tell the typical white folks that you speak on, is that it's not so much that it's your fault. We know you weren't alive 400 or 500 years ago, 1,000, 2,000 years ago. The point is, understand the history and try to deal with it a little bit. I think that's all we can ask. Yeah. Just understand it. We're not saying it's you. There's always going to be an element of guilt that we did that to those folks for so long. We get that. And at some point, we have to get past that. I hate to say it that way, but at some point we have to get past it, but we still have to remember what happened.
There's a certain type of, I think, there's a certain type of white apology that's very self-serving. I've seen this before where, like, I'm going to get in the street and I'm going to cry publicly or wear some t-shirt or wear like fake chains. And I'm like, you're actually mocking what happened. Right. Also, people look like you were chained and sold in Barbados and sold in the Arab world. Like,
that's true.
It's just like you need to understand. Like, it's just very little compared to them.
Right.
But my point is, like, I don't like this play acting. I don't like this because I did an integrated church presentation a few years ago, and there was a white woman that was kind of like crying for too much attention. Like,
Right.
We were just so awful. Like, and I'm like, first of all, like, what could we do? We're just so awful. Like, first of all, I said, maybe you need, I said, well, I actually said, you need better white heroes. I was like, what you think is that all white people from your culture are these generals and this person. I started giving examples. These people are the minority, but look up the Grinke sisters. Look up the white Southerners who fought for the Union. Look at the civil rights workers who stepped in front of those guns and got killed. Right. Or Viola Maza. I'm like, these people were there. They lived in historical times. Even in Jamestown, there were people who tried to stop the slave ships from landing, or the white indentured servants who rebelled, right? The people in London. I'm saying, if you look at those people as white examples who do the right thing, it does two things for you. It says that you realize that these decisions that were made in a racist white system were still choices, and that there were people who always called it out for being wrong. So heroic people are usually not the majority. Heroic people are usually a tiny minority.
Very tiny minority.
And there are
it's so much harder to stand up.
Right, but look at those people if you want to see role models for yourself.
Absolutely.
Instead of saying like, I'm going to throw off, what are you going to do? Take a knife and cut off what you? It's just stupid. Because what you're really trying to do is make this big scene so everybody likes you, instead of actually like not making it about yourself and understanding that like we got to do this hard work together. And the fact is, there were people who looked like you, who did say this is wrong, who did try to work to stop it. So maybe more of us need to work harder. That's the lesson.
Right.
But the point is, if the majority of us had actually stood up, well, my friend J.C. Falk from Baltimore said, Mark, if it was up to black folks to end racism, it would have ended 400 years ago. We've done what we can do. Yeah. You guys got to do something too. But the point, but
we are very welcoming people.
Yeah, but what I'm arguing is it's just, that annoys me because I think it's usually not genuine. It's usually some sort of
grandstanding.
Yeah, and I don't have time for it, and that doesn't help move anybody.
We just got to do the work.
Yeah, we got to be like, we don't have time for that. Like, because if we know that we used to all be in the trenches together, that's what I'm saying, and that's when people have always been unified when they have a common foe or when they have a common oppressor. But unfortunately, when people get a little bit of extra over somebody else, what are they going to do? They're going to fight like hell to keep it.
That's what it is.
That's what we got to fight against, those demons in our own society and our own cultural.
That's very well said.
Yeah.
Very well said.
Did what I had to do just to feed me, and what was left over.